Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Isabelle Braley-Cartillier. I work at the IDB within the Connectivity, Markets and Finance Division. I want to thank all of you for participating today in this webinar. This webinar is the first of a series that we are launching. The idea is to share the experience of China in the transition to a sustainable finance sector and see what we could replicate in our region of Latin America and the Caribbean. This webinar series is brought to you by a new technical assistance program from the IDB called GLC. For GLC, the IDB has partnered with the People's Bank of China and other key green stakeholders to develop a knowledge sharing. We worked, for example, with Boston University. So for our first webinar, I'd like to thank Alan Meng for taking the time to share with us his knowledge of the green bond market in China. Alan is a market analyst based in Climate Bond Initiative in the London office. He's also a member of the Green Finance Advisory Group of the UN Sustainable Stock Exchanges Initiative. Alan holds a Master in Environmental Technology from Imperial College in London, and he previously studied management at Shanghai Normal University and Soochow University. I hope I pronounced that properly. I'm going to give Alan the floor. One logistic detail before we start, we'll have a Q&A session after the presentation, so please send your questions via the chat, and we will organize them and pass them on to Alan so he can answer them in the most efficient way possible. Thank you again, and Alan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Isabel. Hello, everyone. My name is Alan. I'm a green bond analyst at Climate Bonds Initiative. So first of all, I would like to thank IDB for facilitating this webinar. And it's my pleasure to share my knowledge and my experience about China's green bond market. Throughout today's webinar, I hope I can help you have a better understanding of what is happening on China's green bond market and why China and how China has become one of the world's largest green bond market in just a few years. And of course, I will bring some of the key studies of green bonds issuance from China, and I will try my best to answer your questions in the Q&A session. So before I get started, I would like to introduce Climate Bonds Initiative a little bit. So we are a London-based NGO with the ambition to facilitate institutional investors to allocate and reallocate their assets to green sectors to address climate change. And in particular, we focus on the financial instrument called bond. We focus on green bond. So a green bond works exactly the same way as a regular bond in the way that the issuer raises money by issuing the bond and pay the interest to the investors and pay the principal when the bond is get matured. Instead of raising money for any kind of projects, a green bond is different from a regular bond because it has to finance for green projects only. So on this page, basically it shows what is a green bond, what are the elements. So on the global market, there are two sets of widely accepted guidance on green bond issuance. One is called the Green Bond Principles. So that was developed by ICMA, the International Capital Market Association, and the other one is called Climate Bond Standards, which was developed by us, Climate Bonds Initiative. So both of these two sets of standards or principles suggested 4 basic elements for a green bond. First of all, the use of proceeds. So the proceeds of the bond should be used to eligible green projects like renewable energy or low carbon transportation. And secondly, the issuer should disclose the process that the projects being evaluated and selected. Thirdly, once being issued, the bonds, the proceeds raised by the bonds should be put into a special account and should be managed separately. So The reason for doing this is to prevent the process to be contaminated. Last but not least, the issuers should report on the progress of the project and the use of proceeds at least annually until the bond is matured. So that's the basic elements. I know there might be, some confusion because we have been frequently asked, what are the differences between green bond principles and climate bond standards? Well, the answer is, generally speaking, green bond principles are very broad guidelines. So it's just for the use, or in other words, I mean, it provides the issuers with the guidance, very broad guidance on the key components of the green bond issuance. While the climate bond standards which set out the clear criteria to verify the certain green credentials of a bond. For example, when it comes to, for example, low carbon transport. So let's taking railway, for example, the climate bond standards has like certain requirement on the per passenger per kilometer emission threshold. So that's the main differences. And another concept I would like to introduce is climate bond taxonomy. So the climate bond taxonomy is, by our definition, it's a very broad classification of the eligible green projects that can be financed by a green bond. So it includes like categories such as clean energy, low carbon transport, water, low carbon building. So these are the big sectors. And within each big sector, we have subsectors. So the subsectors with the purple logo represents those subsectors that we have developed detailed threshold for the green bond standards. So these are, where the green bond can be certified against. So you can download like the more detailed taxonomy from our website. So this is just a summary. And just before I start with China's green bond market, I would like to introduce the green bond market as a global phenomenon. So basically, last year in 2017, the United States was the largest source of green bond, with 42 billion US dollars issued. That was followed by China with 37 billion US dollars. So as you can see in the bar chart on the right, so these two countries alone made up of around 50% of the global issuance last year, and the same with the year before in 2016. The first green bond from China was actually issued in December 2015 or November 2015 by Agricultural Bank of China. So that was an offshore issuance. So the bond was issued in London, listed on London Stock Exchange. But actually that bond kicked off both the domestic and overseas green bond issuance from China. Well, actually by the end of 2016, the total green bond issuance from China has already reached 35 billion, I remember, US dollars. So making China the largest issuer in that year. So, that's why we say that, China's green bond market started from zero and became a hero in no more than 2 years. So who are issuing green bonds in China? This is a issuer type breakdown of China's overseas and domestic green bond issuance. So as we can see, commercial banks and other financial institutions, like financial leasing companies, they are the largest issuer type, and followed by non-financial corporates, so like solar panel manufacturers and like wind turbine manufacturers or electric vehicle manufacturers, etc. So the second, so they are the second largest issuer type, and also the government-backed entities. So basically, this means like the municipal transport agencies, or like the metro companies or local government financing vehicles. So they issued 10% green bonds overall. Also, policy banks issued another 15% of the China's green bonds. So policy banks, they are kind of like very special type of, institution in China's banking system. There are basically 3 policy banks in China, including the Agricultural Development Bank of China, China Development Bank, Export-Import Bank of China. So they are, sort of China's own development bank, and they finance for the country's infrastructure work, especially those infrastructure work led by the government. So in the pie chart, we can see, although the government-backed entities and policy banks only made up of like 25% of the market, I would also like to say, the market in China is actually driven by the market, by the policy initiative. So the troika that has been driving the China's green bond market forward. So I summarized basically 3 factors. First of all, it's because the top-level design on ecological civilization. So top-level design, it is a very popular concept in China right now, which means basically, the commitment from the central government or from the leadership of the Communist Party. So we know that China's economy has been quite successful during the past decades, but the whole society has paid huge amount of environmental costs. But luckily enough, the government and the leadership, like Xi Jinping's administration, they have realized that the importance of addressing climate change and other environmental issues, like air pollution, like water pollution, or like soil contamination, etc. This is very important for China. Basically, I've got 2 quotes from China's President Xi Jinping. It's quite interesting. So one of them is during the G20 summit in China in 2015, Xi Jinping said, lucid water and lush mountains are invaluable assets for China. And the other quote was made in the 17th National Congress in China last year in November, I think. So basically Xi Jinping said that China needs to create a market-based system for green technology innovation, to develop green finance, and to spur the development of energy saving and environmental protection industries. So as you can see, all these top-level commitments have already set the tone for China's green economy and green finance development in the future. Meanwhile, following the top-level designs, the ministries and the regulators, they have developed very specific green bond guidelines. So it comes to the second point in this page. You know that in December 2015, China's central bank, the PBOC, which is called the People's Bank of China, they released the world's first national green bond guidelines. And also PBOC released a green bond endorsed project catalog. So the catalog indicates that all the eligible green projects that can be financed by a green bond. And just 1 month later, in January 2016, the NDRC, National Development and Reform Commission, they issued its own green bond guidelines. And also CSRC, the China's Securities Regulatory Commission, and the NAFMI, which is the National Association of Financial Market Institutional Investors, they also issued their own green bond guidelines, like respectively. So you may wonder that, why all the regulators they issued green bond guidelines separately, and the answer is because it's mainly due to the regulation structure of the overall bond market in China is quite fragmented. For example, the central bank, PBOC, it oversees bond, not just green bond, but overall, in general, the bond issued by commercial banks and other financial institutions. NDRC, it oversees bond issued by state-owned enterprises, and the CSRC, it regulates bond issued by listed companies, and the NAFMI is a market intermediary. So as we can see, these guidelines have covered all types of bonds. So in other words, no matter in what type the issuer wants to issue a green bond, there is a set of guidelines that the issuer could follow. However, to avoid confusion of the market, we know it's quite important to have a harmonized guidelines. So the China's PBOC, central bank PBOC, and the NDRC, they have been working together to develop a new version integrated green bond guidelines, and hopefully it will come to the market very soon. So the third point is that market infrastructure. So we have seen that green bond market infrastructures being built up in China very, very quickly. So the two stock exchanges in China, they have launched green bond programs in early 2016 to encourage green bond issuance from the listed companies and to encourage green bond listing. So taking Shanghai Stock Exchange, for example, it has already set up a dedicated green bond segment on the stock exchange platform to increase the visibility of green bonds. Also, it gives green bonds a special ID. So starting with G, so G is for green. So it also helps investors to easily identify investable green bonds on the platform. Also, we have seen green bond indices being developed, established to track the performance of the China's domestic green bond market. So for example, Shanghai Stock Exchange, they co-listed a green bond index on their own platform and also on Luxembourg Green Exchange platform to help the European investors to have better understanding of China's domestic green bond market. Lastly, we have seen a variety of green bond verification agencies. Now they are providing assurance on for the green bond credentials in China. So they include the big four accounting firms like EY, Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, and a number of China's local companies. And we will revisit this verification later. So this is just a timeline of all these policies, guidelines I mentioned. So that's why, you know, but by far, I mean, it's very self-explanatory that, you know, why the green finance in China has become a phenomenon and why the green bond market has increased exponentially. It's all because of all these green bond guidelines, green finance initiatives. So I think there are a couple of things we didn't touch on, like this one. So the 7 ministries in 2016, they jointly released the guidelines for establishing green financial system in China. So it includes not only green bonds, but also like green insurance, green credit, green indices, green stock exchanges, and green equities. So all those things. And also this one, the State Council of China in the second quarter in 2017, I remember it approved green finance and innovation pilot zones in 5 provinces. And the latest news I would like to introduce is this one. So the PBOC, the central bank, it announced that it will include green bond as a collateral for medium-term lending facility. So this is very, very interesting. And I would like to introduce in the next slides. Right. So basically, PBOC, it announced just on last Friday, I think, the 1st of June, to include green bond as an eligible collateral for the medium-term lending facility. So the medium-term lending facility, MLF, basically it's a monetary policy tool used by the Central Bank of China. So it provides lending to commercial banks to up to 3 months with a very low interest rate, but it requires the borrowers, which is the commercial banks, to put their eligible assets to the central bank as a collateral. So including the green bond as an eligible asset in the collateral, I definitely believe it's a very big step that China takes to largely encourage the commercial banks in China to have more green bond assets on their balance sheet. So it encouraged basically to encourage commercial banks to invest in green bonds. So I can see, the result of this big movement is that the demand side will be largely encouraged, and therefore the supply side, which is the green bond issuance, will be further stimulated in China. So another big movement announced on the same day is that PBOC is going to include green credit into its macroprudential assessment. So the macroprudential assessment, MPA, it monitors the bank's capital adequacy ratios, assets, liabilities, risks, all this financial performance and risks. So including green credit means the central bank in China is actually considering to link the climate risks to the bank's financial risks. So the result, basically, in one word, it means the more lending to green business or to green assets a bank has, the higher credit it will receive in NPA. It's not clear yet, but in the future, the banks with higher like green credit in the NPA may receive more incentives. So let's see. Right, so this is a summary chart of the external review of China's green bond. So as we can see that nearly 60% of China's green bond market, of the China's green bond market is now verified by the big four accounting firms. For example, EY. So EY is the largest verifier, and with about 35% of the market share in China. And it is followed by PwC and Deloitte with around 10% respectively. And also other verifiers include diversified Chinese local verifiers, like credit rating agencies or consulting firms or specialized green or sustainability accounting firms. And this is a summary of the allocation of the proceeds. So as we can also see that allocation of the proceeds is actually very diversified as well. So the largest climate sector being financed by a green bond in China is clean energy, with 22% of the market share, and followed by low carbon transport such as metro, light rail, and intercity and national level high-speed trains. And this is mainly due to the large scale and very fast pace of China's urbanization development. Also, China has to address some challenges for its further growth in the green bond market. So apart from the strong momentum we just mentioned, in the increasing market size or something like that, so only 62% of green bonds from China is actually aligned with international definitions of green. So in other words, 38% of the green bonds from China were not considered as green by the international investors. And it is mainly due to three main type of reasons. So firstly, it's because the differences, of what are defined as eligible green projects by China's local definition, by the China's local green bond guidelines, and those international ones. For example, clean coal technologies or coal power plant retrofits, they are considered eligible green bond projects under China's own green bond definitions. PBOC's definitions. However, it's not considered green by international definitions. So clean coal technologies, basically, They include, the methods and maybe process to reduce carbon emissions, reduce sulfur dioxide emissions, and other like hazardous substances like mercury. CBI, we do acknowledge, the positive environmental impact of clean coal, especially in China's context. However, if we consider, in order to achieve the 2-degree target by 2050, we need more rapid transition. So that means any coal-fired plant, any coal-fired power stations, they need to be replaced as soon as possible. So in this case, investment in any coal projects is actually, extending the life cycle of coal generation. So in this case, it is now in line with the 2-degree target. And the second reason is that more than 5% of the proceeds allocated to general working capital. We know that ideally, green bond proceeds should be, fully allocated to green projects, but it is also widely accepted by the international investors that the issuer can use no more than 5% of the proceeds to cover its issuing cost. So that means, as long as at least 95% of the proceeds is allocated to green project, the bond will be considered to be aligned with international definitions like GBP or green bond principles or climate bond standards. However, in China, as we mentioned before, the NDRC, National Development and Reform Commission, in their green bond guidelines, they allow up to 50%, half of the proceeds that can be used as general working capital. So which might not be necessarily linked to green projects. So, many of the bonds approved by NDRC, they didn't meet the international definitions. They didn't meet the threshold because they used more than 5% of the proceeds as a very general working capital. So the last reason is transparency. We know that transparency is very important for investors to track the actual use of the money. So we wouldn't consider a bond is green if we can't find, the actual issuing document or any detailed information on the expected use of the proceeds. Right, so I'm gonna introduce some very interesting or important key deals from China. And the first one I would like to introduce is the retail green bond issued by China Development Bank. So as we mentioned at the issuer types page before, so China Development Bank is one of the 3 policy banks in China. It's responsible for infrastructure finance, especially for those national level infrastructure projects led by the government. So here is some basic information of this deal. So the total size of the bond is 5 billion Chinese yuan, which is equivalent to 763 million US dollars. So 600 million Chinese yuan of this bond is actually available to individual investors. So, and all the proceeds will be used for water protection and treatment projects in central China's provinces along the Yangtze River. So in the issuing document, I found that, this bond has very detailed information of the intended use of proceeds. So you can even know the specific name and location of each project. It also has very detailed disclosure on the expected environmental impact and climate impact. So in the prospectus of the bonds, so it says that all the projects to be financed will have these combined impact, including the reduction in BOD bioxygen demand, and the reduction in total suspended solids, reduction of total nitrogen, etc. So this deal is very important because, the whole market is now aiming at motivating institutional investors. But this bank issued a bond to individual investors, because individual investors are also important because, at the end of the day, all the institutional investors, no matter it's insurance companies or the pension fund, they represent the collective interest of every individual. So I found this bond very interesting because the bond did two things. So first of all, it raised environmental awareness of the public. So, when this bond came out in China last year, it raised a huge noise in China on the social media, on the internet. So I believe millions of people, they read the news about this bond, about green bond, and that might be the first time, millions of people got to know what is a green bond and why, China need water protection, along the Yangtze River. And secondly, this bond incubates individual green investors or individual responsible investors, because a bond issued by a policy bank, such as China Development Bank, is also called a quasi-sovereign bond in China. So it has very low risks, and it's tax exempted. And this bond, in this case, it has a 4.5% annual interest rate. So, why would an individual put their money into the bank deposit with like 2% annual interest rate and never know what your money is going to be used if there's more green bonds available for individual investors like this one? So that's why I consider this is a very important deal in China. And another one, the Green Belt and Road bond. So Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, it's basically a development strategy proposed by the Chinese government back to 2013. So it is expected to bridge the gap of infrastructure development in the Asia Pacific regions and in Central Asia, in Eastern Europe. So BRI covers 68 countries, equivalent to 65% of the world's population and 40% of the global GDP in 2017. So that means it's a very important initiative. Last October, ICBC, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, they issued a Green Belt and Road bond. So the bond was issued in three tranches. That was issued on Luxembourg Green Exchange. So the bank, the issuer, gives a specific name, One Belt One Road Green Climate Bond, for this one. So all the proceeds will be used for renewable energy projects, low carbon transportation, and sustainable waters projects. So European investors took over more than 70% of this deal. So they are very interested in this. So we know that it's according to AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Development Bank. So it is estimated that Asia will need up to $900 billion of infrastructure investment per year during the next 10 years, and mostly it will be financed by that instrument. So it provides a great opportunity for the massive infrastructure, because it can be built as green and it can be financed by a green bond. For example, when a country or a city, when they build any new water supply or water treatment projects, they need to include climate resilient factors into the consideration. So it also applies to other like urban transit or waste treatment sectors. So this bond was actually also certified by us, by Climate Bonds Initiative. Right. Another deal is more beyond BRI. So there are also other like overseas green investments made by a Chinese company, that are financed by a green bond. So I don't know whether you have heard about this Chinese company, Geely Auto. So basically, this is like one of the largest local automobile company in China, and it acquired about 10% share of the German automobile giant Daimler earlier this year, and it is the actual owner of London Taxi Company. So in 2016, Geely Automobile issued $400 million green bond for its subsidiary, London Taxi Company. So the bond was listed on Singapore Stock Exchange, and all the proceeds were used for the R&D and the manufacture of the hybrid battery powered London Black Cab. So in the picture, you can see so the taxi on the left-hand side. So that's the sort of old-fashioned and diesel powered vehicle, and on the right, the more modern designed that's the zero-emission taxi that financed by this green bond. So this bond has also received more than 6 times over subscription. Another deal, Green Panda Bond. So the definition of a panda bond is that it's a Chinese currency, Chinese RMB denominated bond issued by a foreign entity but sold in domestic China's market, like the Shanghai Stock Exchange or Shenzhen Stock Exchange or the interbank bond market. So Green Panda Bond is therefore a Chinese yuan, Chinese RMB denominated green bond issued by a foreign entity in China. And the New Development Bank, they issued the first Green Panda Bond in China. So the New Development Bank actually formally is known as the BRICS Development Bank. So it's a multilateral development bank established by the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So this bond, actually, all the proceeds will be used to finance renewable energy, low carbon transport, pollution control projects in the member countries, including Brazil, including India, South Africa, and China. So one example is that the bond will finance for the grid infrastructure connected to renewable energy source in South Africa. So to issue a Green Panda Bond in China, well, actually the issuers have to comply with at least China's domestic green bond guidelines. For example, if it's issued by a foreign bank, so it has to get approval from the Central Bank of China, the PBOC. So therefore, it has to follow the PBOC's green bond guidelines. And so these are the basic information. So this bond was issued on China's interbank bond market, and it received over 3 times oversubscription. Right. So another case is a dual recourse bond issued by Bank of China. So this bond was actually issued in 2016 on London Stock Exchange. So the structure of a dual recourse bond is very interesting because the structure works like this. First of all, the bond is backed by a pool of assets on its balance sheet. So in this case, in this issuance, it's the green bonds or climate-aligned bonds issued by other companies or the lendings to companies in China. So in this case, the underlying assets actually all comes from the climate-aligned bond index. So this is one of the products that CBI developed with partners in China. So we maintain this index. Basically, this index includes not only green bond issued in China, but also those climate-aligned bonds. By saying climate-aligned bonds, we mean the bonds issued by green pure play companies, but not labeled as green bond. So it's more like diverse than green bond. So in this case, Bank of China uses these green assets on their balance sheet as a pool of assets, and they issue the green bond. So the proceeds raised will be used for water, clean energy, clean transport projects. So the structure basically enables that the banks first of all, it enables that when the banks, for example, becomes insolvent, so the investors holding this green bond can still receive their scheduled interest payments from the underlying assets of these green bonds in the asset pool. And the structure has basically two benefits. Firstly, it gathers, the green assets on the bank's balance sheet, and we know that the more green loans or more green bonds on the bank's balance sheet, the lower environmental risks the bank will have. And secondly, that's the green that's a credit enhancement, because it's considered, the structure is considered more secure. So the bond receive AA3 rating from the Moody's, which is higher than China's sovereign rating. So this is very interesting. Another case. The last case I want to share is from China Three Gorges. So China Three Gorges is the largest hydropower enterprise in the world in terms of the total installed capacity. In spite of the controversies over its hydro projects, so the company also making some efforts to take the lead in wind power, solar power, and other forms of clean energy. So as long, from our standing point, as long as the proceeds is separately management or is ring-fenced, it can help, it will be considered as a green, and it will help the more conventional companies to move to green sectors. So 100% of this bond, the proceeds will be used for wind energy. So more specifically, it will finance a offshore wind farm in Germany and one in Portugal. And it also disclosed very detailed expected climate impact, like reduction of CO2 emission, etc. So this one was also certified by Climate Bonds Initiative. So what do we expect in China in the next couple of years? So we have mentioned that PBOC and NDRC, they have been working together to harmonize the green bond guidelines in China, and also European Investment Bank and People's Bank of China. They have also been working together to align the European green bond definitions with China's domestic green bond definitions. And secondly, it's about BRI, so the opportunities around greening the Belt and Road Initiative. So in May, I remember last year, 2017, China held the first Belt and Road Summit in Beijing, and China demonstrated that its ambition to green the Belt and Road Initiative and to include renewable energy and other infrastructure into its strategy. So we have already seen that the major banks, including the China Development Bank, Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, as we just mentioned, and the Bank of China, we have seen all these banks. They issued green bonds to support green infrastructures in countries along the Belt and Road Initiative. And yeah, so this is another thing we will expect in the future. And thirdly, we will expect more green bond issuance from China's LGFVs. So LGFVs are China's local government financing vehicles. So they are usually set up by local government authorities or municipalities. So LGFVs, they serve as a special purpose entity, basically as SPV, to finance the cities or the country's infrastructure projects. Well, although that almost all the LGFVs are registered as corporates in China, because they are actually backed by the government, so we don't consider them as a corporate, but kind of like government-backed entities, and they provide kind of like off-budget solution to local government for their financing strategies. And fourth, that's the green ABS or green securitization trend in China. So the first China's green ABS was issued in 2016, and by far there has been around 20 green ABS deals issued in China, and the proportion increased from around 2%, I remember in 2016, to around 8% by far. However, it's still a small proportion of China's overall green bond market. But we have already seen that a variety of climate themes such as renewable energies, low carbon buildings, water management, and low carbon transport financed by green ABS, and we have seen a lot of a variety of underlying green assets like solar receivables from solar panels, receivables from wind turbines, wind leasings. So this will be a very big trend in China. And fifth, that's the Bond Connect scheme and Hong Kong's position as another powerhouse for green bond market in China. So Green Bond Connect is very important. So it is a kind of like the new market access scheme, developed by China's central government and the securities market regulators. So that allows investors from mainland China and overseas to trade in each other's bond market through the connection between the mainland and Hong Kong's financial institutions. So it contains two parts, the northbound trading and the southbound trading. So the northbound trading allows overseas investors to invest in China's domestic bond market, and the southbound trading platform allows domestic investors from China to invest in overseas bond market. And the registration and the trading procedures are largely simplified by using the Bond Connect scheme. So in March this year, also Hong Kong's government announced that they will set up 100 billion Hong Kong dollars green bond issuance program. So it's a green sovereign bond issuance from Hong Kong. So it will be the world's largest sovereign green bond program, at least by far. And also the government of Hong Kong, they released a green bond grant scheme to encourage more companies to issue green bonds in Hong Kong. So basically the green bond grant scheme will offer subsidies to the qualified green bond issuers for their green bond issuance on Hong Kong Stock Exchange or on Hong Kong, other market in Hong Kong. The last point that we are expecting to see is that in the future, because we have already mentioned that so many green bond indices have been developed and established in China, and in the future we will see more green bond fund and green bond ETF, like the exchange traded funds to track all these green bond indices in China and to provide more diversified investment opportunities for both domestic and overseas investors. So that's all the trends we're going to see in the future in China, and that's all my presentation for today. Thank you, and I think that's it. So if you have any questions, just let me know.
Alan?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, we had a little people issue here. You hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Alan doesn't hear me. Yes. Okay.
Hello.
So one of the questions we received is around the potential for non-Chinese panda bonds. So So the potential for non-Chinese issuers to issue in China. So we saw that there is a first one that was done by the New Development Bank, which is not a Chinese entity, but has, I guess, good Chinese capacity. What is your opinion on a real non-Chinese issuer getting into that market? What would be the learning curve? Do you have any idea of the cost? And have you heard of more green panda bonds coming? That's
Yeah,
one of the
so
questions. The other question is around the new, because in the region we're looking at how governments can promote the green bond markets, and so we're really interested into the last news, the fact that the banks can use the green bonds on the interbank markets, and that your credit rating would be better if you invested as a bank in green assets. I understand it's very recent. Do you have any idea of the impact on the green bond market yet? Is this something that CBI is going to follow? That are two questions for now. I don't know if you want to answer this, and then I'll ask two more questions.
yeah, sure. I mean, for the green panda bond, as I know that we have seen like 3 or 4 green panda bond issued in China, but actually, I think the New Development Bank is the only like actual foreign entity, because the other 2 are actually subsidiaries of a Chinese entity, a Chinese company. So, for example, if it's a Chinese company, domiciled in China, and its subsidiary actually registered in like a Virgin Island or Cayman Island, so in that case, the subsidiary is considered as a foreign entity. So if that subsidiary issue a bond in China's domestic market, it will also be considered as a foreign entity. So it will be considered as a green panda bond, a panda bond. So the New Development Bank might be the only actual foreign entity. And but I don't know like the cost of like the issuing a green panda bond. But I mean, in this case, as you can see, it's the interest rate is like the coupon rate is 3.07%, and not so bad because it's development bank, and it received a 3.1 times oversubscription. And I would say most of the investors are China's domestic investors, because China's bond market is not open yet to overseas investors. So according to just this case, the coupon rate and the oversubscription, I would say is quite promising, the result. And I mean, the major thing I would like to address again is that if you want to issue a green panda bond in China, focus on the green side, the green credentials. You have to follow China's domestic green bond guidelines. So if it's because I mentioned that like the Chinese bond market is quite fragmented, so different types of issuers, they will seek for approval from different regulators. So if it's a bank, and if it's a development bank or commercial bank, it will be approved by PBOC. So you need to follow PBOC's green bond guidelines. And if it's non-financial corporate, I think that's a CSRC. The China's Securities Regulatory Commission will approve the bond. So the overseas issuer, should follow the CSRC's green bond guidelines in that case. So that's my answer to the first question. And for the second one, well, to be honest, I don't know yet, because literally that news came out on last Friday, January 1st of June. So I don't know how the market will react, but I assume the investor side, the demand side will be stimulated, because green bond is a eligible assets in the collateral. So when the commercial banks want to borrow the money from the from the central banks for their liquidity reasons, they definitely want to have green bond as assets. And yeah, so that's my answers.
Yeah, we have a lot of many more questions. Most of the questions are about your opinion about what could be replicated from China to origin. So you know very well the Chinese bond market, green bond market, but you also know the international bond market because you're working at CBI. You do know Latin America a little bit. What would you see as the main potential of replication between the Chinese experience and our region?
Well, I mean, the main thing, the main lessons I think we could get from China is that how the market has been stimulated, how the market has been kicked off by the policymakers. So all these policies, guidelines, including the central bank's movement on the eligible collateral. So definitely the local government. I mean, the government in countries could replicate what China has been doing, like issue national green bond guidelines and these sort of things. And secondly, that's the market infrastructure. So like stock exchanges. So for example, globally, so many stock exchanges they have already established the green bond segment. For example, London Stock Exchange, Luxembourg Green Exchange, Taiwan Stock Exchange, Shanghai Stock Exchange, Oslo, Johannesburg, and Italian Stock Exchange, and I think also Mexican Stock Exchange. They also have a dedicated green bond segment. So I mean, the market structures like stock exchange intermediaries, they can provide like the platform to facilitate the visibility or the liquidity of the green bond listing, green bond trading. And so that's the second lessons. And thirdly, I mean, definitely from the issuer side, I mean, more like commercial banks or different banks or corporates should look into green bonds as a new to put green bonds as a new new thing into their agenda, because we have already seen that the benefits of issuing green bond in developing countries like China, like India, and even Indonesia, like the government, the country's government has issued a sovereign green bond. So that's all the benefits. It's not only about reputation, but also about to get a lower interest rate, lower costs. So that's the one study that my colleague has been doing. So she has been researching on the premium market and to try to see whether there's pricing benefit for green bond. But because green bond is still a very niche market, so the evidence is not like perfect. It's not 100% like strong, but we have already seen that many of the green bonds have shown very good pricing benefit.
I think we can share that study. It's out, right? The study on the premiums.
Yes. So actually, it's called Greenium.
So we'll share it.
Green premium.
Okay, green premium. Yeah. There were a couple of questions about. I think in one of the slides on the retail green bonds, you were talking about a tax advantage, and then the question was it only for that green bond, the tax advantage, or is it something that's been a big driver in the development of the green bond market in China?
No, so basically that's for the overall bond market. So all the bond, whether it's a green bond or not, if it's issued by a policy bank, it's tax exempted. So it's not just for the green bond.
The question again, and I think most of the question comes to the same route, is that is there a space for foreign issuers in the Chinese green bond market? If let's say a Brazilian bank want to issue green bonds in China, do you think the Chinese market is ready Do you think there would be demand? Is there big demand for the market yet, or do you think it's a little early and only, as you said, only companies with big links to China would be successful in that adventure?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say that. But I mean, in particular, whether there will be enough like demand among the investors. But on the top level, I know that the China's central government, they they quite encourage like the investment, overseas investment, especially in like agricultural sectors in like Africa, South America. So I mean, in terms of like the policy initiative or the commitment of the central government, I can say that there is a strong like demand. But when it comes to like particular or specific issuance, I can't tell actually, to be honest.
I think we're more or less gone through the main questions, and I know it's very late for you there in London, and thank you for taking the time. So I think we're gonna close and conclude this webinar. I thank you very much to all of you who've been participating. This was the first of a series, so you're gonna receive a follow-up email with the schedule of the next webinars. We will also circulate Alan's presentation. It will be on our platform, so you'll receive the link. Alan, thank you very much. And to all of you, thank you very much. If you have any question, you can follow up by email.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah,
thank
so
you.
If you have questions, yeah, feel free to send me an email. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Good night, Alan. Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.